Historically, military forces viewed cities as obstacles to be bypassed or contained. Today, concentrated global populations and infrastructure have eliminated that option. Dense urban terrain is no longer an exception. It's the baseline condition of modern warfare. The largest metropolitan areas have expanded into megacities containing tens of millions of people. At this scale, traditional tactics like isolation and encirclement are mathematically impossible. You cannot starve out or bypass a footprint the size of a small country. Military leadership has definitively recognized this shift. General Mark Milley, Chief of Staff of the Army, issued a directive that forces must be specifically organized and equipped for highly dense urban environments. Yet, despite this recognition, the dominant mental model for ground combat remains two-dimensional. Planners continue to treat terrain as a flat surface, anticipating engagements along identifiable frontages where fires and maneuver can be applied sequentially. Applying these open field principles to a dense, stacked environment generates immediate operational friction. A force that attempts to secure a street while ignoring the structures towering above it or the transit tunnels running beneath it will quickly find itself surrounded on axes it isn't even monitoring. Entering a megacity with a two-dimensional understanding of terrain causes forces to misidentify threats and misallocate resources. It guarantees operational paralysis. To rethink the doctrinal blueprint, the four-floor war provides a framework specifically for this environment. It describes the vertical stratification of combat. A unit evacuates civilians up top, detains targets in the middle, fights on the ground, and defends the basement. Figuratively, the four-floor model represents the integration of non-physical dimensions. The physical structure acts as a container for the informational, electromagnetic, and cognitive layers that permeate the operational volume. Success requires commanders to abandon sequential phasing. They must manage all four vertical and non-physical layers simultaneously, within the exact same operational moment. This transition requires dismantling the traditional map. Two-dimensional representations fail to capture the city's true geometry. We must view the battle space as a volume. A 10-story building offers 11 times the defensible space of its footprint once you include the roof and basement. These civilian structures act as incidental military fortifications. Thick concrete walls provide heavy physical concealment, while windows and balconies offer defenders overlapping fields of fire that rival purpose-built bunkers. This creates severe vertical confinement. Attackers in the streets are funneled into lethal choke points, navigating narrow urban canyons while defenders engage from multiple elevated planes. And the threat extends downward. Modern cities contain deep subterranean networks, utility tunnels, sewers, and subway lines that act as a co-equal operational layer. These networks grant adversaries the ability to maneuver completely unseen, launching counterattacks directly behind supposedly secured front lines. The critical tactical levers connecting these disconnected spaces are transition points. Stairwells, elevator shafts, and subway grates are the only ways to move between layers. Establishing physical presence on a street is an illusion of control if the vertical elevations above and the subterranean transition points below remain contested. The defining feature of this volumetric terrain is the massive, persistent presence of civilians. In a sudden conflict, millions of residents simply cannot evacuate. Military doctrine frequently views these populations as a secondary concern, either as passive targets for aid or as frustrating constraints on the use of heavy weapons. That perspective is incomplete. Civilians are constitutive terrain. They observe troop movements, consume resources, and physically occupy the space. Their behavior physically alters the geometry of the fight. Mass displacement or panic can instantly blockade a street, canalizing military movement without a shot being fired. This creates extreme friction in target identification. Adversaries deliberately embed themselves within this human terrain, exploiting proximity to restrict incoming fire, and forcing soldiers to make life or death decisions in seconds. Preserving civilian infrastructure, like power grids and water treatment plants, becomes an absolute military necessity. A localized humanitarian collapse will instantly consume combat units forced to manage the crisis. There is no warfighting separate from population management. A force that alienates the human terrain actively degrades its own combat power and operational mobility. Piled on top of the physical and human terrain are the invisible layers. The first is the electromagnetic spectrum. A modern megacity is electromagnetically saturated. Between civilian Wi-Fi, automotive radar, and cellular networks, the background noise is deafening, and every military emission is a potential targeting vector. A single tactical action, like a squad communicating from an apartment, instantly generates an electromagnetic signature that adversary sensors can track. Simultaneously, civilians in adjacent rooms capture the event on smartphones, broadcasting it to global networks in real time. This convergence produces the cognitive layer. Tactical commanders face extreme data overload, operating in close physical proximity to the enemy while managing intense moral friction. The time available to observe, orient, decide, and act compresses to near zero. Capable adversaries actively exploit this cognitive strain. They use deception, mix combatants with civilians, and manipulate the fight's tempo to force errors. This feeds directly into global narrative warfare. Tactical mistakes or out-of-context video clips are weaponized to shape strategic perception before the friendly force can even file an after-action report. Securing physical terrain is meaningless if a force loses control of its electromagnetic emissions and the global information narrative in the exact same operational moment. Operating across all these layers exposes the sequential fallacy. You cannot clear a block, secure the information, and then stabilize the population in predictable phases. Everything must happen at once. Physical maneuver, cyber defense, electromagnetic masking, and civil affairs must be executed concurrently. This requires a massive shift in task organization. Specialized capabilities like cyber operations, signals intelligence, and engineering cannot be held back at a distant headquarters. They must be embedded directly into squads and platoons. Centralized top-down command architectures shatter under the friction of urban combat. Radio signals degrade through concrete, and decision cycles are too compressed to wait for authorization from a commander miles away. Units need redundant communication systems and the procedural authority to execute lateral coordination. A platoon must be able to share intelligence with an adjacent unit directly, without routing the request up the chain of command. Tactical survival demands decentralized execution, guided by centralized intent. The authority to integrate multi-domain effects must sit at the absolute point of contact. When peer military forces clash in a megacity, the attritional reality is horrific. High-intensity fires and urban clearance produce destruction that counterinsurgency models never anticipated. We cannot rely solely on technology to bypass this brutality. Artificial intelligence, advanced sensors, and precision munitions are multipliers, but they cannot replace the human requirement to secure a basement, clear a stairwell, and look civilians in the eye. Military institutions must adapt comprehensively. Force design, logistics, and training regimens must be built for the megacity by default, not as an afterthought. Frameworks like the four-floor war are necessary tools to align force structure with the actual conditions of the battle space. The four-floor war is already the present condition of ground combat. Victory will belong solely to the forces that abandon the illusion of the flat battlefield and master the brutal friction of the layered city.